And the Torah portion this week is Vayishlach. But before we really get started, and I did send you, I emailed you, you may not have had time to really look at your inbox and see it in there. But if you do, while I'm reading this, it'll give you a few seconds to take a look. I just sent you a basic table document because what I'd like for us to do in this class is to go through the entire Torah portion. And we're going to do what's called exercising Dina, which is understanding. And what Dina helps us to do is to categorize, to understand things by taking them apart and assigning them a place. And in the process of doing that, it kind of forces your brain from the more passive listening mode into an actively learning mode, because now you're analyzing what you're reading and you're separating this from that. So on the document I sent you, it's just a basic table, and if you've got a notebook in front of you, you can just draw 3 lines and make your own table. You don't have to have that document. But I just wanted to show you what I wanted to do today, to take a different approach to the Torah portion and make you more active instead of passively listening. And then having to unsort it over the next few days, which is the normal course of events. But I know you're probably going to be busy this week. So I thought we would do something more active in the hour that we have. So while you're doing that, or while you're making your own little columns on a piece of paper, I wanted to read to you. I want to give you a compliment. And I know we've talked about, like, how do you receive compliments? If you dismiss them entirely, it's kind of an insult to the person who gives you the compliment, as if they're not smart enough to know, whatever it is they're complimenting you about. But you don't want to take more credit than is yours, because truly it's by the strength of Adonai that we do anything. So there's that balance there. But for this class, and I didn't have a chance to compliment last night, but hopefully they'll listen to the recording and they'll hear the compliment anyway. And those who do the recordings, I want them to hear the compliment too. And the compliment is that you have taken a fixed time to prioritize something that's typically toward the end of even a person of faith, is typically toward the end of their to-do list on a day or on a week. And that's making time to study. I mean, not just read. A lot of people read their Bibles before they go to bed, or they read their Bibles with their coffee when they get up in the morning. But not a lot of people make a fixed time to really study, to go beyond just the verse of the day or the maxim of the day. You want more. And so you have set a time to study. So I want to read to you from Pirkei Avot, which is in the Mishnah. It's the oldest recording of the Jewish oral law that we have. And in Pirkei Avot 1:15, it says, make your Torah study a fixed practice. In other words, set a time for it. And that's what we do. We set a time and we show up. It says, say little and do much, and greet everyone with a pleasant countenance. Now, ironically, that came from Shammai, who is not known as the most pleasant Pharisee that ever lived. Probably he's characterized as quite the opposite of greeting everyone with a pleasant countenance. Nevertheless, there might be some irony here. But I wanted to read a little blurb from Rabbi Twersky, who was also a psychiatrist. And he's commenting on this. Make your Torah study a fixed practice. He says it's more than just a matter of time. Of course, one should devote as much time as possible to the study of the Torah, but there's more involved. He said, I met a physician whom I had treated several months earlier for alcoholism. and I asked him whether he was following my recommendations to attend daily meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. He said, yes, I still attend 3 meetings a day. A bit surprised by this zeal, and that's one thing we're going to study today is zeal. A bit surprised by this zeal, I asked, don't you have office hours? The doctor answered, yes, in between meetings. He said, you see, if I don't attend 3 meetings a day, I will drink again, and I won't have an office at all. This man understood his priorities. He wanted to stay sober, and nothing else mattered. Doing whatever it took to stay sober came first, and everything else was secondary. That is how it must be with the Torah. The study of the Torah must come first, and everything else should fit within that framework. If this priority is observed, one will find more time for Torah study than if one squeezes Torah study into a busy schedule. And I thought that was really profound, because in these classes, I feel like we're achieving a higher level than a lot of people who even study the weekly Torah portion. I feel like as we go through these weeks and months, and sometimes for some of you now years, we're digging out places that we never knew existed in the text. And it's helping the big picture fit together. But that only happens, it doesn't happen by accident. There has to be the zeal. And that's what Rabbi Twersky was talking about. That's what Shemaiah was talking about. If you're zealous in your Torah study, it's because you recognize that it's not something you really fit into your schedule. It's that the rest of your schedule fits into your Torah study. It's just a matter of priority. And we can eventually, there's distance in terms of skill with the word between the person who crams Torah study into a busy schedule, and there's days that's the best we can do. But for a person, Shammai is talking about, what is your habit? What's your custom? What do you normally do? We all have things we have to do on other days. We all have doctor appointments, family crises. I'm not talking about the abnormal things, which sometimes seem like they're more normal than abnormal, but nevertheless, because we said, this is my priority, I pick this day and I pick this time, or I pick this time every day. Whatever your habit is, you fix it, is what Shammai says. And that is what's going to make the difference between that you and the you that just says, well, wherever I can fit it in. You know, I'll take a few spare minutes here. I'll take a few minutes before I go to bed. And we know what happens when we do that. Stuff comes up and we end up just falling into the bed because we can't keep our eyes open. Opening a book at bedtime is, you just call it the Sandman, I guess. Because you're not going to be able to stay awake and do it then, which is another saying. If not now, when? When will we do it? And so I want to compliment you on making a fixed time for your Torah study. That whatever else you have to do on this day at this time, you're working it around this appointment. It's an appointment with Adonai. It's an appointment with the other people in the class. It's an appointment with me. And we've all prepared for it in some way. Usually by at least looking over the Torah portion. And that's going to create distance, like I said, between this you and the you who's simply doing your best, you think, to find a time to study. Instead, this has become your priority. And your growth with the text. And I think what Shammai is talking about, once you immerse yourself in the Word, it's so much easier to greet everyone with a cheerful countenance. It really is. because that zeal is going to be balanced with what I'm going to call in this Torah portion appeasement. And that appeasement is going to be demonstrated through Jacob sending this parade, basically, of gifts. It's a mincha, and there's a mincha prayer. The Shmona Yesrei, the 3 o'clock prayer, is a mincha. It's like a gift to God from you. Of course, we all know it's a gift from him to us when we pray. But I want to look at the 3 things that yesterday or last night in the class we talked about the camp and how it functions as both masculine and feminine. It's a weird Hebrew word. It's one of 4. Wind or ruach can be masculine or feminine. Fire can be masculine or feminine. What was the other one? It's right on the tip of my tongue. Wind, fire, sun. Shemesh, the sun, like the sun in the sky. And then in this Torah portion, camp, machaneh. Those 4 words, they're not like other normal Hebrew words that are either masculine or feminine. In context, they'll show up as masculine and feminine. And so there's a shift we can see in the function of the camp. And sometimes the camp, it's a refuge, and we see it being used in that way in this Torah portion. But it also morphs into an understanding that Jacob, should Esau attack the first camp, he says the second one will become a refuge. Why? Because Jacob intends to fight. If appeasement doesn't work, if the gifts don't work, if bending over backward to be pleasant and asking for forgiveness and making peace, if those efforts don't work and Esau falls upon the first camp, then he's saying they'll fall back to the other camp. That will be their refuge because I'm going to fight. I'm not going to let him just destroy everything that's mine. So there's a poem, and I'll try to translate it to English. It's when you're doing poetry, that's not that easy. But it says, Lamad me Yosef, Baal ha-chalamot, which is learn from Joseph, the master of dreams, or the dreamer. La'avo, which means to cross, to shift. Me siof le pios, which is from swords to plowshares, or from spears to peace, for a poem. But that's something we can learn from Joseph. He starts out with the sword of his mouth, being the gossip, being the tattletale. But he's also a dreamer. And what does a dreamer do? A dreamer can change. A dreamer can move from a more spiritual place and bring himself back into that more physical place. He can move from realm to realm. And he's saying, we need to learn from Joseph that when war doesn't work, maybe we should try peace. And sometimes when peace doesn't work, like Jacob is implying, it's time to make war. So let me pull up my document. And where did I do it? Okay. On the document, I wanted you to have columns so that we could look at the 3 elements, I believe, of the Torah portion that are going to help us understand this back and forth between Jacob and Esau, and even between his children, the Shechemites, everything that's going on in the Torah portion, I believe, because I only found 1, 2, 3, out of the whole Torah portion, I only found 4 passages where I put them in the column for I'm not sure. The rest of it to me was pretty definite, and sometimes it was in both places at the same time. It was both zeal and appeasement. So in your columns, I wanted you to have one column for prayer, and all you're going to do on each column is you're going to put a scripture reference. I'll give you the little scripture package because sometimes it's more than one verse. And then I want you to place it somewhere. I want you to place it under a column called prayer. I want you to have another column called zeal, Z-E-A-L. And then I want you to have a third column. I'm calling it appeasement, but you could also put peace in there. Just because the word appeasement popped up pretty frequently, I put appeasement or making peace, reconciliation, whatever word works for you. And then I have a fourth column labeled, I'm not sure. I'm not really sure what they're doing right there. It doesn't seem to fit, at least for me, neatly into those columns. And we can argue about it if you want to. I've just gone through here ahead of time, and I've picked out for the passages whether I thought Jacob was trying to appease or whoever it was. It might have been Shechem in a certain passage. Whether I thought that person's approach to the problem was appeasement, whether I thought his approach to the problem was zeal, and the zeal, we're not defining it as either positive or negative, because some people have zeal, but not according to knowledge. It's religious zeal. They mean well. They are firmly convinced they're doing the right thing at that time. They're like righteous indignation, or so they think. But in hindsight, they're going to realize God never told me to do that. And that's why I've got the results I've got. So we're not going to make a judgment call on the zeal. We're just going to say this is an expression of zeal. And then the third column is going to be prayer. Instead of having some zealous or overzealous reaction, or instead of simply trying to make peace and appease, did they go to the altar? Did they make a prayer for rescue? What happened here? So let's go. And like I say, you're welcome to argue. This is a class where you can unmute yourself and argue. Just if you're done talking, just remember to mute yourself back, because if somebody else tries to talk, we'll get a lot of feedback and then we won't understand each other, which is the way a lot of arguments go anyway. So let's start at the very beginning. And I don't know if we'll make it to the end, but if we make it to the end, this strange genealogy about Esau, wedged in there is another genealogy of Edom that doesn't seem to fit Edom's genealogy. It's kind of strange. And I'll tell you a secret about that genealogy if we make it that far. So we're going to start with Genesis 32, and we'll go in order. We won't flip back and forth. That'll make it easier. And Genesis 32, 4 through 6. I want you to, I'll read it, and you decide, is this sounding like prayer, zeal, or appeasement? It says, and Jacob sent angels before him to Esau his brother to the land of Seir, the field of Edom. He charged them, saying, thus shall you say to my lord, to Esau, so said your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and have lingered until now. I have acquired ox and donkey, flock and servant and maidservant, and I am sending to tell my lord to find favor in your eyes. Okay, what's the verdict here? Prayer, zeal, or appeasement? That one's too easy, isn't it? That's appeasement. He's trying to make peace. He's trying to reconcile here. But remember, if you disagree, you got to chime in there. You got to hit your button or whatever. So let's go to 7, verse 7. It says, the angels or the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to your brother, to Esau. Moreover, he is heading toward you, and 400 men are with him. Okay, at that point, Jacob does not know what the intent of the 400 people or 400 warriors is. So I'm guessing at this point, it's zeal. Esau doesn't just come to visit, he brings 400 other visitors to Jacob. So there seems to be a real zeal for whatever Esau is trying to do. It's either going to big hearty welcome or it's going to be a big hearty slaughter, one or the other. So yeah, I did put that one under zeal. The next one is chapter 32, verses 8 and 9. And Jacob became very frightened, and it distressed him. So he divided the people with him, and the flocks, and the cattle, and the camels into 2 camps. And he said, if Esau comes to the one camp and strikes it, then the remaining camp shall be a refuge. Okay, that hint there, I think we've normally just read the part where he divided the camps. But we have to think just more logically with this text. How can that second camp be a refuge if Esau falls upon the first one, unless Jacob intends to defend it? So we can see a shift in Jacob's mind that if appeasement doesn't work, then I'm willing to basically turn the plowshare into the sword. So for that reason, just because of the way it's worded, where he specifically says it's going to be the refuge. And you can look that word for refuge up, pleta, and context, and see if you come up with a different answer. But in a lot of places, it means being rescued from a war or a battle. So I chose zeal. I see Jacob transforming, like he sees the zeal with which Esau is coming upon him, and he's tried the appeasement and not knowing what Esau's intent is. I see him as mustering up his zeal, saying, okay, I can tell if he attacks this one, I'm going to have to defend this one, and they'll have to fall back to the second camp. So I put zeal. The next one. Do we have an objection? No?
Hi, it's Coral.
Hey.
I was just a little curious for 2 things on these that are not necessarily part of what we're doing, but a person that I studied with asked me last night a question is, how can he send angels or messengers that he can do it and not God? So I thought that was an interesting question. And also, I think I did read somewhere a couple of years ago that one camp was behind the other one. That would be a strategy. The one with his wives and children in them would have been next to come to. Is that correct?
Pretty much, which at this point, we've got 2 camps. But then later, when he sees Esau's intent is not war, he brings them forward in 4, with each set of children with their mothers. So it would divide even further from 2 camps into 4, basically, in terms of introducing them to Esau. Were they stacked like one behind the other? It seems to indicate that he is trying to hide Rachel. He is trying to protect her by putting the sons and the handmaidens. He seems to be valuing them less by putting them first. Like if anybody gets attacked first, it'll be these, and then they would have to keep falling back to the safer place. So it appears to me he's preparing for either possibility at this point. He's exercising that zeal by trying to figure out through the division how to save. How could he send angels? That's a good question, because it does say malakim. And angels are malakim, but it can also just mean messenger. So I think the play on word there is it's giving us a heads up that we're reading prophecy, because Jacob and Edom will encounter one another at the end of days. And I think there's something within this text that's cluing us in as to how that interaction at the end of days is going to take place. And I think, I don't know if it's Rashi or a different rabbi, he points out that in this case, when Jacob returns, he's going into the land, but he doesn't go toward Esau. Esau comes to him. But they say in the days of Messiah, Jacob is going to go track down Esau. Jacob is going to go to Edom for judgment. So I think sometimes it's giving us a pattern of this is the way it could occur again. And I think sometimes it's giving us a pattern of next time it'll be the opposite of this. So at least in the rabbis thinking, it'll be different. Jacob will not be the appeaser. It will be up to Edom if he wants to try to make peace. The roles will be reversed.
Thank you, Halissa. I'm learning to think in prophecy thoughts. How's that? Thank you.
Easy.
Yeah.
Especially when we're still struggling just to get the basic story down, that's harder. Okay, where were we? 32, 8 through 9, we just did.
Alyssa, this is a question. Whenever we are coming up to any event in our life, are we not, able to, I'm not sure if I've ever actually sent an angel out per se, but I have asked the Lord to go ahead of me to help guide me and help me to understand whatever's going on, because a situation I know might be tense. So maybe that, now my scripture, which is ESV, does say in 32:1 that the angels of God met him. So I understand that he's actually sending angels, but I actually never had put together that the messengers were angels before today. So, but is that not kind of the same thing? I'm asking for prophetically to line up with whatever God wants rather than let emotions run us. So
it makes a lot of sense to do that, because sometimes he does assign us angels. And there is a lot of commentary about these angels if we actually do that as a focus study. I think I probably tended to avoid that because some people take it way overboard and then they start talking to angels. And I'm not sure that's who they're talking to in all cases, if the angels are good or if they need to be talked to. But typically, if you pray and you intercede, then he can dispatch an angel to do whatever he tells it to do. So that may have been what was going on with Jacob, because he keeps having these angelic encounters. This first one he has at Bethel, on his way to Haran, they don't pay any attention to him. But it seems when he comes back, he gets a lot of attention. And one interpretation of the wrestling match we're going to come to, the all-night wrestling match, is that he wrestled with Esau's angel. And it was going back to the old question of the blessing. But we'll be able to see, I believe, that Esau actually releases Jacob and says, whatever you have is yours. I'm not going to fight you over it. And somehow maybe that was settled the night before in spiritual realms with that great wrestling. In fact, was it Naphtali, that Leah said, with great wrestlings, I've wrestled with my sister. No, that was Rachel, when Bilhah bore, was it Dan and Naphtali? And she was referring to the wrestling match. And it's not so much the wrestling match with her physical sister. It's a spiritual thing that's she's suffering under. Let's see. Then Jacob said, this is 32, I'm going to go 10 through 13 this time. And of course, this one's a giveaway. Then Jacob said, God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, Hashem, who said to me, return to your land and to your birthplace, and I will do good with you. I have been diminished by all the kindnesses and by all the truth that you have done your servant. For with my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. Rescue me, please, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and strike me, mother and children. Okay, that's pretty obviously a prayer. Help! Help fast. Just a comment on one of those verses. He says, for with my staff I crossed this Jordan. Rashi comments that he used the staff to part the Jordan the same way that the Jordan parted for the Israelites, and the same way that Moses used the staff for the children of Israel to cross the Red Sea. And that they say that's why he mentioned it, that it doesn't mean my staff was the only thing I had to my name, but that somehow that staff was instrumental in him crossing that Jordan. But that one, I don't see that one as anything but a prayer. And then the next passage, 32:14 through did I skip 13? And you had said, I will surely do good with you and make you your offspring like the sand of the sea, which is too numerous to be counted. I think I told last night's class this, but I don't know if it was during class or after class. The rabbis say, why did he say sand of the sea instead of dust of the earth, which both are part of the blessing? But they say that when they use sand of the sea, it refers to the days of Messiah. And when they use dust of the earth, it refers to the days preceding. And I'm not sure what the rationale is there. But anyway, I say we're getting little messianic hints in this and little prophecy hints. But I don't know that we're getting enough hints to really piece a bigger picture together. Although I think Revelation, when that beast comes up on the sand of the seashore, I think that's a very specific hint that it is bringing in the days of Messiah because of the sand of the seashore. Okay, so the next passage, 14 through 22. He spent the night there. Then he took from that which had come into his hand a tribute to Esau his brother. She-goats 200, he-goats 20, ewes 200, rams 20, nursing camels and their young 30, cows 40, and bulls 10, she-donkeys 20, and he-donkeys 10. He put in his servants' charge each herd separately and said to his servants, pass on ahead of me and put a space between herd and herd. He instructed the first one, saying, when my brother Esau meets you and asks you, saying, whose are you, where are you going, and to whom are these that are before you, you shall say, your servants, Jacob's. It is a tribute sent to my lord, to Esau, and behold, he too is behind us. He similarly charged the second, also the third, as well as all who followed the herds, saying, in this manner shall you speak to Esau when you find him. And you shall say, moreover, behold, your servant Jacob is behind us. For he said, I will wipe away his furious countenance, with the tribute that precedes me, and afterwards I will face him. Perhaps he will forgive me." So the tribute passed on before him while he spent that night in the camp. Any objection to appeasement there? That sounds like Yom Kippur. In fact, it actually uses the root of Kippur, the Day of Atonement, where it says, "I will wipe away his furious countenance." That root there is kafar for Kippur. And again, we're getting these little Yom Kippur pictures, just like we did with the blessing in the tent in the previous Torah portion. So if there's no objections, we'll go to 32:23 through 24. "But he got up that night and took his 2 wives and his 2 handmaids and his 11 sons and crossed the ford of the Yavuk. And he took them and brought them across the stream, and he brought across that which was his." What do you think? I think that's zeal. I think he's showing us that he has the zeal to protect what is his. He doesn't just leave them exposed. He's actually crossing back over this stream to make sure everybody's got that barrier of safety. Everything it says that was his. So when you protect that which is yours, I think we call that zeal. And jealous and zealous are kind of the same thing in Scripture. Cain, and you, like the jealous husband, what does he have? He has zeal for his relationship with his wife, so that you can have the negative sort of actions, but you can also have positive actions. In this case, protection of his family, that's also an expression of zeal. Okay. Now this next one we might argue about, because I couldn't make up my own mind. So this would be 32:25 through 33. It says, "And Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. When he perceived that he could not overcome him, he struck the ball of his thigh bone, and the ball of Jacob's thigh bone became dislocated as he wrestled with him. Then he said, 'Let me go, for dawn is broken.' And he said, 'I will not let you go unless you have blessed me.' He said to him, 'What is your name?' He said, 'Jacob.' He said, 'No longer will it be said that your name is Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with the divine and with men, and you have overcome.' Then Jacob inquired, and he said, 'Tell, if you please, your name.' And he said, 'Why is it that you ask my name?' And he blessed him there. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen the divine face to face, yet my life was spared. The sun rose for him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping on his hip." See, one more. "Therefore the children of Israel are not to eat the displaced sinew on the ball of the thigh bone to this day, because he struck the ball of Jacob's thigh bone on the displaced sinew." So I had that in all three columns for different reasons. Jacob is saying I have seen the divine face to face. We don't know if he's talking about this man that he wrestled with, or if he's talking about a previous experience when the angel of the Lord appeared to him, or both. So I said, well, I see aspects of prayer here, because it reminds me of, we have the term prayer warrior. someone who will hang in there and intercede as long as it takes, like the old Pentecostals say, to pray through. I saw an attribute of prayer here. I also saw an attribute of zeal. Jacob would not let go. He kept wrestling. And then I also, on the part of the man or the angel, whatever he is, I see appeasement in the conversation. I see a kind of a reconciliation of the wrestling match. So what do you guys think? Do you think it's more one than the other?
Hi, everybody. I think it's definitely all three. I agree. And I do have a question on this hip and socket. I think that it was just a person that I went to Israel with that commented that this could have been likened to the swearing under the thigh. Do you have anything to say about that, Halissa? Thank you.
It could be. It's kind of funny because that particular part of the human body, the way that it's shaped, it's referred to, what we would say is the spoon of the body. And like cough, like something that's covered. And there again, we're kind of getting that idea of kippur, covering, atonement, or wiping away. So in this struggle, that ball of the hip in Hebrew is called kaf, which is shorter than kafar or kippur, but there's the two-letter root there. And in modern Hebrew, it's basically like kapit, like the spoon. You can even do it with your hand. You can make the spoon, the kapit, with your hand. And so it's like it's a spoon shape, is why it's called that. And even in English, we have, it's kind of graphic, but we say, when we snuggle with our spouse, it's called spooning because we're kind of in each other's embrace. So there's like a closeness. I don't know if that's random, just like coincidental, but it does tend to imply a closeness. And if somebody touches your thigh, because, if Abraham says, place your hand under my thigh and swear to me, then basically you're slipping your hand in a very private place because that's the place of the covenant. And so it sounds like Jacob's upright, but in the process of his touching him, which, it is connected to the covenant, but it also displaces that ball of his hip. And how that affects the intimacy of the covenant, I'm not sure.
Well, I kind of took on that same thinking that you're speaking to us, and that he gets a new name, of course, at this point. So it's like being reborn, connected to that private part that the swearing was done on, the seed. That sound correct? Just I want to make sure I'm speaking it correctly.
Yes. Which kind of goes back to when we were talking about those weird bugs in Revelation and then their origin back in the Torah. And one of the things that they did was scorpion-like. And I think in the prophet it says, even though you sit on scorpions, a serpent may bite at your heel, or in Paul's case, may bite his hand as he reaches into the fire. But with the scorpion, it's an interesting counterpoint or showing you a different aspect. And I can't remember the source. One of the elder at our congregation found it that showed like when a scorpion bites you, it's hot, but when a serpent bites you, it's hot. When a scorpion bites you, it's cold. And so when you sit on a scorpion, the idea is if it had power over you, then it would make you cold spiritually. So that place, there is significance to it. And what did it say in the last days? The love of many will grow cold. That they've been bitten basically by the scorpion in terms of covenant relationship. But they also comment, which goes back to that discussion of the sun being both masculine and feminine, where it says in verse 32, it says the sun rose for him as he passed Penuel, and he was limping on his hip. And the comment there where it says the sun rose for him, it's that it healed his limp. As the verse says, a son of charity with healing on its wings in Malachi 3:20. So yes, he was made to limp as a result of the wrestling, but the rabbis interpret that passage as saying, but God healed him as the sun came up. And the word there where it says the sinew was displaced, it says the word noshe, means literally jumping. So it jumped out of its place. And then immediately following that, it says Jacob raised his eyes and saw. And so that's our signal verse, or our signal phrase. If we see raised his eyes or raised her eyes, then we know they're seeing more than they're seeing. They're seeing prophetically. They're not just seeing what's happening immediately in front of them. They're seeing what could repeat itself in cycles of prophecy all the way to the end of days. And I've taught on the question, who are these, before, because that phrase keeps popping up. Who are these? Who are these? Who are these? Even Rachel, who are these? Who has begotten me these? Where did these come from? And Esau is expressing that same surprise, like, who are these? Well, it's obvious who they are. I mean, seriously, it's a prophetic question for us to answer. Who are these? And we know that it's the children and the wives. Who were the two principals of the garden? Do you remember? In Abraham's bosom? The children and the bride. Those are the people that are taken into Abraham's bosom. And so he identifies, he says these are the children. He says the children whom God has graciously given your servant. And then the handmaids came forward and the children too. So I think that kind of solves that question of who are these. Jacob is saying, these are my offspring that will one day be restored to the garden. These are the people that will be found in Abraham's bosom, prophetically. So that's awesome, right there. Okay, let me figure out, where are we? 33:1. Jacob raised his eyes and saw, and behold, Esau was coming, and with him 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two handmaids. And I put that under zeal. I mean, again, I see Jacob's protective instinct, but I also, because of the phrase raised his eyes and saw, I see it as prophetic zeal, that he was protecting us. Not just the people in front of him, but he always had looked down through the generations. Like when he steals so-called the birthright, it's because he cared about us. Esau didn't. Esau only cared about people in his lifetime. Like if I don't get something to eat, I'm going to die. Well, he's not going to die. He's just hungry right now. All that matters to Esau is right now, the physical. But Jacob raised his eyes. And so I put this toward zeal, yes, but the good kind, the prophetic, thinking forward to generations. And then in 33:2, it says the same. I use that as prophetic zeal. And verse 3, he went on ahead of them and bowed earthward 7 times until he reached his brother. Okay, from there I switched. I put zeal on verse 1 and 2, and then I switched over on verse 3 and put appeasement. Because he's giving this subservient, this bowing, respectful posture to Esau 7 times. He bowed 7 times before he ever gets to his brother. So I thought that it might have other elements there, because he could have been praying while he was down there. Like, God help me. Here he comes. But I just thought that overall, it looked to me like appeasement. And you see how he's switching back and forth in a very short amount of time? And I'm hoping by seeing how fast these things shift, how we have to do it. As we conduct our day, we really have to be aware. Should I be in reconciliation mode right now? Should I be in zeal mode, or should I be in prayer mode? And like we're seeing, sometimes all 3 at the same time. But it's reading situations, which was the tribe Issachar, and so they knew the times, they knew what to do. Knowing whether it was time to make peace, make war, or make prayer, or all 3. And then I think 33:4 falls into a multiple category that says Esau ran toward him, and he embraced him and fell upon his neck and kissed him, and they wept. So it's hard to say exactly what was on Esau's heart when he did that, but I see zeal, and I also see appeasement on his part. Like in the sense of reconciliation, appeasement. So I put that in 2 places. And then I've got a longer passage, 5 through 11. And notice this, all of a sudden, when Esau goes into appeasement or reconciliation mode, now he raises his eyes. He raised his eyes and saw the women and children. Those are our 2 groups of Abraham's bosom. Women and children, and he said, who are these with you? Or who are these to you? He said, the children whom God has graciously given your servant. Then the handmaids came forward, they and their children, and they bowed down. And Leah too came forward with her children, and they bowed down. And afterwards, Joseph and Rachel came forward and bowed down. And he asked, who is all this camp that I met to you? He answered, to gain favor in my Lord's eyes. Esau said, I have plenty, my brother. Let what you have remain yours. But Jacob said, please do not. If I have now found favor in your eyes, then accept my tribute from me, inasmuch as I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of a divine being, and you have been appeased by me. Please accept my homage, which was brought to you, inasmuch as God has been gracious to me, and inasmuch as I have everything. He urged him, and he accepted. I mark that whole passage as appeasement on both parts. I see an interaction there between the two brothers and even the wives and the children. They have a posture of appeasement, of respect. And again, who is all this camp? Esau is starting to see something that maybe he missed before or he didn't care about before. And the good news about Esau is he did have some righteous descendants. If we make it that far, I'll show you where we find them in the family line, which go down to Reuel, which you'll recognize is another name for Moses' father-in-law. He had multiple names. He had Yitro, Reuel, and it seems like there was one other one, I don't remember. So I put appeasement there on both, well, on everybody's part. There's full peace right now. And so the tension of the story is just ratcheted way down at this point. 33:12, and this is Esau talking. He says, travel on and let us go. I will proceed alongside you. I felt like my needle on that one moved towards zeal. He's now expressing zeal in a positive way for Jacob's safety, extending the welcome. Of course, I don't know that Jacob's convinced of that, but if you're Jacob, this was unexpected. And then 13 and 14, Jacob said to him, my Lord knows that the children are tender, and the nursing flocks and cattle are upon me, and they will drive them hard for one day. Then all the flocks will die. Let my Lord go ahead of his servant. I will make my way at my slow pace, according to the gate of the work that is before me, and to the gate of the children, until I come to my Lord at Seir. I think there's probably a mouthful of prophecy in that. But as far as categorization, I went back to appeasement and reconciliation, because now he's reconciling himself to the slow gait of the nursing of the youngest of the flock, the youngest of his children. And I think that happens frequently with babies in the faith. They run very far, very fast, and it's really beyond their ability. And it can be disastrous. It can kill them in the long run, or they'll get off into bizarre stuff. It's not good for them. It's better to bring people along slowly at their pace, which is what Hillel was famous for. Shammai, no, not so much, but being merciful toward the new person. Verse 15.
That's me again.
Okay.
Thank you. I had a little question on this because it came up last night when we were studying too. It's going back up to verse 7 and how they're listing, the text is listing mother and child, but then they come to Joseph and they list Joseph first and then Rachel. Mm-hmm. Any rabbinical stuff, it seems definitely prophetic to me.
Mm-hmm. They say that because Joseph was known for being of pure heart, being a sexually moral person, that he recognized that Esau was not, and he stepped between Esau and his mother so that Esau wouldn't get a good look at her because she was a very beautiful woman, and Joseph wanted to protect his mother from Esau's look. Which they also say that the reason it just says Jacob took his 11 sons, but it doesn't mention Dina's because he hid Dina where Esau wouldn't see her. Because Esau had a thing for women, and there was a lot of incest. As you go into the genealogy of Esau at the end of the Torah portion, there's a lot of places where there's some weird lines in the pedigree because it's incest. So, and it wasn't apparently as big a deal until Moses makes it specific in the Torah that at least for Israel, you will not marry your daughter, you will not marry your sister. I want to say it was first cousins are okay. And which is still the case in the Middle East. They frequently marry their cousins because it's just the way that you keep wealth within the family. It's safer that way than marrying somebody you don't know. And it's the family still there functions as an employment service. You don't send in your resume the way that we do here. It's usually someone in your family that you go work for, or they know somebody. And that's how employment works there. It's a different mindset. But I noticed here, having been around the Middle East enough, especially with Persians, the way that they're talking to one another is called taruf in Farsi. I don't know what it is in Hebrew, or if there's even an actual word for it in Hebrew, but taruf means courtesy that goes beyond the pale. It's excessive courtesy. If I were to take you to my friend Eli the scribe, he would talk to you for 2 minutes and then he would proclaim he loved you. Now, he doesn't mean romantically, but for Persians, it's very normal if you're friends or family members to say, I love you, I love you, I love you. But they don't mean like, I want to take you home with me. Although they would, and probably get you drunk on a rock, but you just say no. But it's a courtesy where you say something you don't really mean because you expect the other person to refuse. When a Westerner goes into that culture and they extend a courtesy to you that they don't really mean for you to accept, but they have to do it because of that's the custom, that's Taro, and the Westerner says, oh, okay, you've messed up the whole deal right there. And it's a dance that has to go back and forth an adequate number of times. And you give them these huge compliments, and then you have to diminish yourself, I'm not worthy of you, or this gift is not worthy of you. You're the light of my eyes. It goes on and on and on. And you see, it's not just Bedouin, it's Middle Eastern to extend courtesy even way beyond what you intend for the person to accept. So you can see the back and forth between Jacob and Esau over the gifts. Like, oh, no, I have no. Oh, no, I want you to have it. Please, please, no. You've been around people in the Middle East. That's very normal. And it's only funny a few times. And then you get very tired of it if you're not used to it. Let's see.
Break. Can you hear me?
I can hear somebody.
Yeah, this is Vicki. As long as we got a break, I had a question earlier. I thought it was very interesting when you brought up the wrestling of the angel, because I'd never heard that interpretation about it being the angel of Esau. And then when you talked about the last verse where, second to last verse, and he's passed over Peniel, the sun rose upon him and he halted upon his thigh. Of course, I'd always been taught that he was that way forever. In fact, there's a famous little saying that goes with this. He struggled with Yeshua and his walk was never the same after that. So now it's given me a whole new look at it. And then you brought up Malachi, and as soon as I heard that verse here, it brought up the verse Isaiah 58:8. Our salvation shall come like the dawn. Our wounds will heal quickly. Our righteousness will lead us forward. and the glory of Yahweh will cover us from behind. And I just went click, click, there it is, those two, you know. And thank you for that, because that opened up a whole new window I never saw before.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's possible that it goes hand in hand with the popping out of the thigh bone, because it's like with Jacob, Yaakov, it had a whole history with it. And a lot of that history was negative, at least with his family, for sure. With Isaac and with Esau, because Esau even mentions his name, you know, that he's deceived me again. He's done it again. He's living up to his name. And I used to watch a dog whisperer, and there were times where he went to work with a dog and he realized the dog had been in trouble so long. When the dog heard its name from the human trying to correct it, it already had such a negative connotation that it was hard to penetrate through that history. And so he's actually, on a couple of occasions that I watched, he had him change the dog's name. Because if they were going to change the way they talked to the dog, they also had to shed the bad history with the dog. You know, whether he was pooping on the floor or whatever it was. You say that dog's name just like you say a child's name. When you see them doing something wrong, you call their name. Well, if they're always doing something wrong, and we've got one like that. I mean, we had a dog before that. He probably thought his name is, "What have you done now?" So the change of the name is prophetic, because you're giving a new designation. Remember, calling and designating, calling a name and designating, they're kind of the same thing. So prophetically, Jacob got a redesignation without the old baggage. So from now on, you're going to be called Yisrael, a prince of El, someone who's struggled and prevailed, who's worked for it. Didn't just deceive for it, but worked for it. You worked for everything, for this relationship that you have. And so he's got this thigh bone thing going on. And he said, assume this is the angel or the man, "Let me go, for the dawn has broken." Because if it's an angel, the understanding is they're all expected to sing when the sun comes up. They have to sing praises when the sun rises. And they say, that's why he's saying, "Let me go, dawn is broken. This is my responsibility. I have to go sing. I have to go give praises." And he says, "I will not let you go unless you have blessed me." And he said, "What is your name?" So right there, the thigh is broken. What is your name? And he says, "No longer will it be said of you that your name is Jacob, but Israel." So it's like there's a healing as the sun comes up, even in his name. He's saying, "I want to heal you of your past," which is a beautiful idea. That when he calls us and we come to that relationship, we wrestle and we wrestle and we wrestle, and we say, "I will not quit until I get peace." And he changes our name. And he takes away the history of the old name. And we have a name of royalty. And so it could be, because it goes straight from there, well, not straight, but I could see the juxtaposition of the sun rising and then the change of the name. And then it said, as it goes on to verse 32, the sun rose for him as he passed Penuel, and he was limping on his hip. And they say that's the point where it healed his hip. And that would make more sense, because to this day they will not eat meat that still has the sciatic nerve attached to it. to me, that would make more sense as a memory of the event. You know, if you're going to remember, if you're going to dismiss an entire back half of a cow or a goat or a sheep or whatever it is that you eat, that's a lot of work, number one. If you try to eat kosher and you're trying to pick cuts of meat from the forward of the loin because you don't know if the sciatic nerve is remaining in it, that's a huge deal down through thousands of years to keep doing that. Why would it be important enough to be mentioned? Maybe it has to do with the healing and the healing in the name, which would be a great inheritance and a great reason, you know, if you were avoiding that sciatic nerve, to internalize it and say, I have a part. Jacob saw me and he wrestled for me, not just himself, but he wrestled for me to also be called Israel. Doesn't that make it huge and worth going for the ground chuck instead of the ground beef? Because ground chuck comes from the front. It'll come from like, and I think of that every time I look for ground chuck, and they'll say, oh, but we've got ground beef. Like, no, I need ground chuck. Why? Because Israel, but you don't understand. I just need the ground chuck. So, Chuck. He needs a name change, doesn't he? Okay, let's see, where were we? 33. We went through appeasement with Esau. And then I thought zeal. And then 33:15, I put it in two places. Esau said, let me assign to you some of the people who are with me. I saw a mixed signal there. Zeal for Jacob, but still reconciliation, like wanting to maintain that connection with him. He could have not wanted that at all. It could have been something else. But that's, to me, that was the plain sense. He's wanting to leave that connection and protect his brother. 33:16. That's one where I put, I don't know. This next passage is 16 through 19. So Esau went back that day on his way towards Seir. Then Jacob journeyed to Sukkot and built himself a house. For his livestock, he made shelters. He called the name of the place Sukkot. I think it's prophecy. I just don't know if I'm ready to call this prayer. Jacob came intact, which is what he prayed for when he left the land, to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, upon his coming from Padan Aram, and he encamped before the city. He bought a helchas, measure of the field upon which he pitched his tent from the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 kesita. That wasn't screaming anything in those three categories. So I just put, I don't know. I can't figure that one out. But 33:20, I did make a decision.
Okay.
And maybe it's part of 20 in terms of the context, because I think we shift over to prayer at that point for sure. That says he set up an altar there and he called it God is the God of Israel. So he's commemorating that name change. It's just the steps of coming to Shechem that I wasn't sure about. And maybe if we joined it to that act as preparation for building that altar, which is going to represent prayer, obviously, then I would be able to put the whole thing into prayer.
Alyssa, I wonder, since there's so much reference to Sukkot and the 100 pieces being a picture of the nations, if that isn't kind of a a physical walking out and proclaiming and praying, and then coming and then designating it as the altar if that's not the prayer.
Yeah. I could see the prayer, and I could also see zeal as pushing him in that direction if I didn't already know he was going in the wrong direction. Because remember, he said, and we read that last night where it says, pay your vows quickly. If it comes out of your mouth, do not delay to perform it. And at this point, Jacob is dragging his feet. And the rabbis say that's why the incident with Dina occurred. He left her wide open because he delayed to pay the vow at Beit El. And so, to me, yes, this is a prayer, but it's like, dude, you're going too slow. And maybe he was so relieved after Esau, he just needed to stop and take a deep breath. But they say that the text implies that he lingered 18 months in between Esau and then going on to Shechem. Because it says they're going by house and shelters for the livestock and the seasons, the passing of the seasons where this would either be necessary or unnecessary. And they said at a minimum, it was 18 months that he would have lingered and not gone on. And see, Sukkot really should have reminded him to pay his vows. And they say because of that, he left Dina basically unprotected. And we talked about that last night, why it's important, not just at Yom Kippur, to pray for the annulment of vows. If you've said something foolish or you've been late to perform it or whatever may have come up, at least say, I'm sorry, forgive me. And I'm not using this as an excuse not to fulfill my word. I'm saying I made a mistake. And we all make mistakes when we say we're going to do things and we don't do them. Or like somebody was asking last night, what if you forgot? I don't think Jacob forgot, but sometimes we do tell people we'll do things and we totally forget it. And that's why I tell people if I do commit myself, I'll say, now you need to remind me, a week before or a day before or a month before, because I will forget. And I don't want the weight of an open vow because it invites problems. And that's why the text we looked at last night in Deuteronomy 23, I think, there was 2 whole verses about paying your vows quickly. And it says it's better not to vow. There's no sin if you don't vow and don't do it. But if you vow and then don't do it, or you're slow to perform it, you're opening up all sorts of stuff. So Jacob should have moved probably a lot faster than he did. And he also was slow to go to his father, which they say that disrespect accounts for why Reuven went on, it's called Jacob's couch, but he went to Bilhah, his wife, because he delayed. So I don't know. But I would tend to believe if we can pair prayer, which we can, with keeping the feasts, even for him, I believe this is a prophetic feast for the nations because we know he's concerned about his descendants. I wouldn't have any problem at all putting that either in zeal or prayer. I would probably have, we could say appeasement because, again, he's making it easy on his family, but maybe appeasing the wrong people. Because I think if he would have moved on to fulfill the vow and to worship at Beit El, I believe Adonai would have kept his flocks and his herds and his children intact. And maybe Dina would not have fallen into what she fell into. And I even put 34:1. Says Dina, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to look over the daughters of the land. It sounds to me like she was mixing,
Yeah.
like being friendly. You know, get to know the neighborhood. So that's what I think about appeasement. Did somebody say something? Okay. Now, on the other hand, from 34:2 through 4, definitely zeal, but the wrong kind. Sexual zeal, but not righteous zeal. I put that in the category of zeal. But then 34:5 says Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter Dina while his sons were with his livestock in the field. So Jacob kept silent until their arrival. I put that under appeasement. Like, I'm not going to start anything until I'm ready. I'll just hold my peace until then. And then I switched. I didn't switch. It says Hamor, Shechem's father, went out to Jacob to speak to him. I also see that as some sort of peacemaking, because even those people, it says in the text, it says such a thing is not done. They were pagan, but they don't just go and snatch virgin daughters unless it's a time of war. So even the people of the land recognize this has got to be dealt with. This has got to be made right. So I see Hamor in verse 6 as making peace. But then in verse 7, when Jacob's sons arrived from the field, when they heard, they were distressed and were fired deeply with indignation. For he had committed an outrage in Israel by lying with the daughter of Jacob, and such a thing is not done. I go back to zeal there, because it's heating up at this point. And then verses 8 through 12 is again Hamor and Shechem trying to make peace, saying, give us the terms, tell us what you want us to do to make this right. We want to acquire her in marriage. I put that back onto appeasement. But then 13 through 17, I moved back to zeal, because it's the sons answering and talking about this is an insult to us, and this is what you have to do. You have to be circumcised. And basically they say, if you don't do it our way, we're going to take Dina and go. But then 18 and 19, I put, I don't know. (13 through 17). I think it might be fake appeasement too, because we know their intent, we know it's zeal, but I could also put it over in the appeasement category, because they're tricking Shechem and Hamor into thinking it's all going to be okay if you just do this, and it's not going to be okay. So it's kind of a deceitful appeasement or offer of reconciliation. Then 18 and 19, I think definitely appeasement, because Shechem, it says he did not delay to do the thing. What thing? Circumcision. That's appeasement if I ever saw it. I don't know if I saw it, but if I ever recognized appeasement, I think that's it. And then I switched back to zeal, verses 20 through 24, because Hamor's explanation of the event is not really to appease so much as it is he's explaining how we're going to get their stuff. we're going to intermarry with them. And he says, will they not be ours? So that's zeal. That's the same word for acquisition. And then in verse 24, still zeal. I mean, if you're willing to get circumcised, you're zealous. But 25 through 31, definitely zeal, because we've got the slaughter there of Shechem. And then all of a sudden, when we get into chapter 35, I think it switches back to prayer. And it seems like with Jacob, there's like this pattern. I don't know if you see, there's kind of a cadence developing in between Jacob's troubles. He goes back to prayer, where he says, or actually God begins, he starts talking to Jacob and says, arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there, like you said you would do, 20 something years ago. And that's where they discard the alien gods. They worship. I put that over in the category of prayer. In fact, I kept it in the category of prayer all the way to verse 15, where Jacob actually pours the oil on the pillar and calls the place Bethel. So then he's finally fulfilled his vow at that point, but we've had the disaster with Dina, with Shechem along the way. And then the story of Rachel dying, giving birth to Benjamin, that was the other one I put in the I don't know exactly what's going on there. And do I want to make it part of another thing? But 16 through 21 is the story of Rachel and more of the journey. And then, see, he completes his vow at Beit El, and then for some reason he's going toward Ephratah. And Ephratah is halfway between Jerusalem and Hebron, where his father is. So there's a path there called the Path of the Patriarchs, and you could still identify parts of it. Was he on that road? I don't know for sure, but we know at least where Rachel was buried, on that road to Ephratah. And it seems to me that instead of going toward Ephratah, he should have been, by that point, forked off going toward Hebron. So why was he going there when he should have been in that direction? And that's what the rabbis say. It says Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard. So I put that in zeal, just not the good kind. Reuben's zeal. And then 35:29. There again, I'm not really sure what that summary says, because they've just buried Rachel. They're going to bury his father. And there is some element of reconciliation, I think, in the burial of Isaac, because it says he was brought into his people, old and fulfilled of days, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. So we see the boys are still getting along. So I would say appeasement at that point. And then it goes on to a long genealogy, which you can go on, and if you've never looked at the pedigree between Isaac, well, actually, you could it doesn't hurt to go back and start with Abraham and Sarah and Hagar. You have to put Hagar in there. And then look at how Ishmael intermarries with the descendants of Esau. But there's also this guy called Seir. It's not Esau, but Esau lives in Seir. Eventually, there's a strange insertion, like I said, within these pedigrees. And it's within that you find something kind of strange. But you also get where Amalek came from. In 36:12, we know Amalek's a huge problem. And it says Timnah was a concubine of Eliphaz, son of Esau. And that would have been through one of the Canaanite women, a pagan woman. And it says, and she bore Amalek to Eliphaz. These are the children of Adah, Esau's wife. But if you go through that family tree and you see where Esau married Basemat, not Adah and not Judith, Basemat, that's going to be a daughter of Ishmael. That offspring there is going to be Reuel, which we know is another name for Yitro. Now, we don't know for sure those are the same two people, but if so, there was a righteousness among the offspring of Ishmael and Esau, and eventually there was a reconciliation of sorts between them and the offspring of Jacob when they basically dwell among the Israelites. And in fact, to this day, if you've ever gone to Israel and met any of the Druze people, they believe that they're descended from Jethro, from Yitro. They are descendants of Reuel, and they make great soldiers in the Israeli army. Fine people. They don't marry out of their tribe, though. They're very isolated in terms of pedigree.